Hi, and welcome to the Healing Trauma with Hypnosis video course. I'm Courtney Armstrong. This is the second video in our series, and today what you're going to learn is how to reconsolidate a traumatic memory using hypnosis. If you missed the first video, please go back and watch it because it gives you a deeper understanding about what hypnosis is, and it will help make more sense when you understand that and look at what you're going to learn today. Specifically, what you're going to learn is what memory reconsolidation is and why it's the key to healing trauma. You're also going to learn how to resource your clients before reviewing traumatic memories so that they don't get upset or abreact or have a lot of pain as they're recalling a traumatic memory. And I'm going to give you a simple 5-step protocol for reconsolidating memories that's present in any effective trauma therapy. I call this RECON. It's an acronym that I made up that will take you through the 5 steps, but it will also be a model that you can adapt to your clients. So it's flexible. Now, when something traumatic happens, it's like our mind stops the movie in the worst place. That's what one of my mentors, John Connolly, said. And it's like they forgot to remember how they survived. What we have to do is link the implicit felt part of the experience to some adaptive knowledge that they've got in what we call their explicit memory. I'll get into that more in just a second. And what's specifically required is that you create an experience that empowers the client and changes the event's context and meaning. Now, let's review what happens when we experience something traumatic and how it affects the brain. So when something threatening happens, of course, our mind, our brain, activates the fight, flight, freeze response. When that happens, of course, a lot of adrenaline is released. That adrenaline not only strengthens us and gives us the extra energy we need to get through the experience, but adrenaline sears the felt part of the experience in any actions we took to survive into our implicit memory in the lower brain areas, the emotional brain and the reptilian brain. The other thing that happens is that cortisol is released during the fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, cortisol inhibits our prefrontal cortex. This is where we have the rational information about the event. It also inhibits our hippocampus, and the hippocampus is responsible for helping us transmit an implicit memory into an explicit memory in a context that's adaptive for us. Now, an implicit memory is the felt part of the memory. It's any sensations that we felt during the event, any behavioral actions we took to survive it, and any sensory triggers like the smells, the sounds, the visual cues, and whatnot. And it's really unconscious. So it can get triggered or activated anytime we encounter anything similar before we consciously have a chance to stop it. The explicit part of the memory might be information that you acquired later. So let's take someone who was affected by sexual abuse. They may know explicitly that they weren't responsible for causing the event, but they still might feel a lot of shame around the event, and they still might get triggered by anything similar, even though they know consciously they don't need to be overreacting to certain triggers. Now, what we discovered in the year 2000 is actually how to rewire these implicit memories. Specifically, Joe Ledoux and Kareem Nader, the guys that you see on the screen, figured out that every time you recall a memory, you take it out of storage. So what usually happens is that you have a new memory or learning, it gets consolidated into a long-term memory, and that can be a long-term felt memory, not just a long-term conscious memory. But when we recall it, when we retrieve it, we have an opportunity to modify it and then restore it as a new memory or an altered memory. Now, this is significant because before this discovery, what we thought is that we had to expose the person to any implicit triggers like the sounds, the smells, and whatnot, and teach their brain that these triggers weren't necessarily dangerous. The thing that happened is that with exposure, even if you had a successful course of treatment, that memory could get activated. All those triggers could still trigger all those same yucky feelings over time or under extreme stress. So exposure therapy seemed to only resolve it temporarily, not permanently. What we found is that exposure just creates two memories in the brain. It's like, let's take combat veterans, for example. What they did at the VA is they would expose a combat veteran to sounds of explosions, people screaming, helicopters, anything that kept triggering those old combat memories. But what the brain seemed to learn is that sometimes all of those triggers, sounds, smells, signal that something dangerous is about to happen. And then there was another network that said sometimes it means nothing really dangerous is going to happen. But the brain thought, you have a 50-50 chance of which of these triggers is really going to predict something dangerous is about to happen. So what your brain would do is often just default and assume that it could be something dangerous because the emotional brain would rather be safe than sorry. So it might still trigger all of that fight, flight, freeze stuff in an effort to protect you. Bessel van der Kolk found when he was doing exposure therapy at the VA that what was required is that we calm the client down and get their nervous system in a more neutral place before reviewing traumatic memories. Otherwise, all of that adrenaline would just cause the memory to be stored in two different networks. But what we found with memory reconsolidation is that you have to do more than just calm your client down. You have to create what's called a mismatch experience. A mismatch experience is a felt experience that changes the meaning of the entire event, not just the triggers. And you, to do that, have to activate the old memory. You have to recall it and juxtapose it with a new experience at the same time where the client can really get a new context around that memory. This was something that was discussed extensively in the book Unlocking the Emotional Brain that came out in 2012. It was written by Bruce Ecker, Laurel Holley, and Robin Tissick, rather. And what they found is that any effective trauma therapy was essentially doing these same steps, in that that is what was required to actually reconsolidate a traumatic memory. The piece that's important is that you have to create an experience in your session, because where that traumatic memory is stored is in the emotional brain that thinks like an animal. It only learns through experience, association, and repetition. And so what we've learned is that if you just talk about the event over and over again and intellectually try to give the client new information about it, the emotional brain doesn't really get it. It doesn't really update. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how we want to resource the client first with a new experience before we start getting into detail about what happened during the traumatic event. So what we want to do is create a vision of what's desired, how they want to be thinking or feeling instead of how they've been feeling. And one of the simplest ways to do that is to help them finish the story in a new place. That new place might be when the event finished and you realized you were okay or realized how you survived it. It could be a later time in your life when you got more insight or felt competent or at least self-compassionate about what happened. Or you could just imagine future you, a time in your life when you're finally able to look back on this experience and use it to your advantage instead of your disadvantage, perhaps living your life in a more empowered or meaningful way. Now, I do acknowledge this is not the way you wanted to get that additional wisdom or power or whatever it is that you got from the experience. But now that it's happened, we want to help the client figure out how they can use it as a resource to strengthen them instead of continuing to haunt them. And what we'll also do is I'll talk about how you can create a symbol to represent that new way of responding, because the subconscious mind or the emotional brain is very responsive to symbols. But first, let's go through a future self imagery together so that you can experience it for yourself. So I'd like you to just recall an event, something recently that maybe isn't incredibly traumatic, but was just something that caused you to feel anxious or angry, and you'd like to not be feeling that anymore. You'd like to be showing up now in a more empowered, wise, compassionate way toward yourself, at least, if nobody else. So just take a moment, think of an event that happened recently that kind of triggered you, and then just bring to mind how you'd like to be feeling. Maybe finishing the story at a new place, or just imagining future you able to take this experience and now show up and respond in a way that's more to your liking, perhaps feeling more empowered, competent, self-compassionate, insightful. And when you kind of get a sense of that, how you'd like to be feeling about this instead, you can create a symbol to represent that, something in nature or an animal in the wild. This is a technique I learned from John Connolly's rapid resolution therapy that I really like. So for example, you could imagine a particular animal that might represent those desired qualities, or it could be something in nature that you can associate with it. Or you could do this. This is a new little technique I came up with, and that's you could see one of your fingers as future you, feeling more empowered, insightful, strong, compassionate. And as you infuse those desired qualities into the future self represented by one of these fingers, and the other finger, let that represent the present you or the past you. And now look at both of those fingers and let future you send love, compassion, and healing to the past you. And let past you feel the strength and love. And just feel those fingers moving closer together. Future you and past you now coming together in a way that's harmonious and loving. Future you letting past you know it's going to be okay. You're going to make it. And past you enjoying the feeling of support and hope and love and compassion. And continue just watching that until those fingers come completely together, symbolizing your mind linking up those memory networks, unconscious and conscious mind coming together in a way that benefits you, so that it's all integrating, coming together and healing and restoring you. Knowing this is already beginning to help that memory network rewire so that you can heal and move forward in a way that benefits you, that's comfortable for you, that heals you. That's it. And when you're ready, you can find your way back here, knowing that if you came up with a symbol or just using this gesture with your fingers to represent your mind now healing, integrating, and coming together, either one will work for you. And taking a deep breath in, anchoring that new secure feeling, and then coming back here. And then we're going to go through the next 5 steps that'll help you reconsolidate that memory even deeper. Okay, so I know we're trying to do this quickly today, and I'm just trying to give you a taste. Of course, in a real session, you would be able to individualize that to your client more and take them into a deeper experience. But I just want to give you the flavor of what that would be like before we continue. So now let's go through the entire recon process. I usually try to resource my clients first with that future self imagery, because most people have a sense of what that is, and that gives them hope and excitement about the future instead of dread. So we're going to go on a recon mission next. And so what we want to do is recall the traumatic memory briefly. We want to explore any embodied beliefs or implicit beliefs that got attached to the event, and also how they help the client survive. Then we want to collaboratively create that felt experience that evokes those desired beliefs and resources. You can do that by just revisiting the future self imagery that we just did together, But you may come up with even more experiences as you and the client go through steps 1 and 2 and explore those embodied beliefs. You'll begin to get a better sense of what kind of experiences they need to have in order to repair and consolidate those embodied beliefs into new beliefs. Once we know what those new beliefs are and we kind of have some experiences that we've helped the client tap into, then we're going to have them retell that story from that new perspective, from that empowered experience. And basically what they're going to do is integrate a new narrative, and that's when the memory reconsolidates. So if you've been with me before, I'm going to take you through each of these steps, step by step, with a case example so that you know how it might look in a session. So the first thing we want to do is say, okay, now that we've got you connected to future self and how you want to be feeling, in order for the brain to link those two things together, I just need you to give me a headline of what happened during the traumatic experience. Just let your mind briefly flash an image that symbolizes it, or just be aware of sensations, feelings, or thoughts, just briefly, that kind of go with that event. That opens that impaired or implicit memory network. It's kind of impaired. And so that's the first step of reconsolidation. You got to recall the memory, take it out of storage. Then what I like to ask the client is, what did it feel like that event meant about you? And what did it feel like it meant about other people or the people involved? And what did it feel like it meant about your future or the world? That's how you get those embodied beliefs. And if you've been trained with people like John Connolly, he's really intuitive and very good at kind of just intuiting those beliefs. But if you're like me, I don't always know if I'm right on target with the client. I found you just ask them. So all you got to do is say, what did it feel like that event meant about you? And then you know what those embodied beliefs are. And then once you get those, you just ask the client, what do you want to believe now? So let me give you an example. I had a client that we'll call Carol, and she was afraid of the ocean. And when I asked her when that started, she said, well, when my mother almost drowned at the beach. So she just given me a headline. So that was step 1. She just said, when my mother drowned at the beach when I was, or almost drowned at the beach when I was 6 years old. Then I asked her, what did it feel like it meant about her when that happened? And she said that I'm helpless around the ocean. And what did it mean about other people? It meant that they were in danger if any of us went to swim in the ocean, and that I can't stop people I love from dying unless I stop them from going to the ocean. And what did it mean about your future? And she said, I guess that I believe life was really fragile. So then I developed this pattern in my life where I panic anytime anybody goes near water, and I'm constantly trying to avoid it myself and get other people that I care about to avoid it. And I said, then what would you like to believe now? And she said that it's okay to go to the ocean, that not everybody's going to drown when they go, and I want to be able to go and enjoy the beach with my family again. So then we create a resource state that anchored those new beliefs. We created an experience. So it could be future you, like her imagining being at the beach and enjoying it. But really, I want to create a mismatch experience that directly addresses those embodied beliefs. So Carol and I collaborated. I said, what we need to do is create an experience that will anchor the belief that you want to have. So let's finish the story in a different place. So tell me, you said your mother almost drowned. What happened? How did she survive? And she said, well, she figured out that if she got her body parallel to the beach, that she could survive the riptide that was happening. So her mom was caught up in a riptide. She initially panicked, which was causing her to be pulled under even more. And when she got her body parallel to the beach, she realized that she was kind of going with the current instead of against it. And she managed to stay above water until the people on the beach got in and saved her and rescued her. So I had her vividly reimagine those people rescuing her mom getting her body parallel to the beach. And then I also had Carol remember her mother teaching her how to do that, teaching her how to get your body parallel to the beach. And I had her vividly remember her mom going into the ocean after that experience and being fine and not being scared and being able to enjoy the beach. So those were the new experiences we needed to directly link with the old memory to finish the story in a new place and to help Carol create that future model, which had the knowledge that I'll be okay and my family will be okay if we, we're careful about not going into the beach when it's really high tide or stormy, and if we remember what we need to do if a rip tide shows up. Then I had her retell that story from that new perspective. That's step 4 of recon, observationally describe it. I call it observational retelling because we don't want her to relive the experience. We want her to watch the old memory like she's watching it on a movie screen and tell it from the perspective of her future self that knows her mother's going to survive and what needs to be done so that this thing doesn't continue to haunt her. So you want them to describe this also while they're fully present. So a lot of what will help clients do is we'll make sure that they're staying present. If we start to see them get really upset or relive it, we'll just ask them to stop and get back in the present time and space with us before they continue. This helps interrupt the pattern. And again, it helps the mind not abreact or cause the prefrontal cortex to go offline. It helps it stay present so that memory gets integrated. You can also have the client finish the story in a new place where they felt they could escape, they got support, they had compassion for themselves, or they felt competent or empowered. For example, I've had a client finish the story. She had sexual abuse from her father. I said, when did it stop? She said, when I was 11. I said, what happened when you were 11? She said, I asked to move my bedroom to a room next door to my parents. So that way I knew that if mom heard what was going on, she would make it stop. And I said, so you stopped it? And she was like, what? And I said, you stopped it by moving your room. So finish the story there. Tell me about what he used to do, and then say, but when I got to be 11, it occurred to me that if I moved my room, I could make that stop. So that's an example of how you would have them retell the story with that new ending. And then what you see happens is a new narrative integration. So you want to listen as they're telling the story for any other negative beliefs they keep attaching to the event or where they feel stuck. And you want to help them keep revising the narrative. So they may stop the story. You may talk about it and help them assign a new meaning to it or remind them of something. Just that relational experience of you being present and helping them feel the truth of a new meaning is another mismatch experience. You want to keep highlighting as you're hearing the story the client's competence, their strength. You don't want to keep focusing on the pain. You want to keep saying, oh my gosh, that must have been awful, but then you did this, which was really smart. So you want to validate feelings as you're also expanding their awareness so they can see other things that they've kind of forgotten about the experience that really shows them they did what made sense then. You want to reframe the behavior of other people, not as dangerous, like, oh my gosh, get in touch with your anger about that. You want to say, my goodness, that was really a whack situation, or they were really malfunctioning in their brain when that happened. Your dad was confused about sexual stuff. There's a million examples I could give, but just for the sake of time, I want to give you the flavor of what it's like to help them integrate a new meaning into the experience. So when they finish the story with new endings, new perspectives, and can retell that story, usually I have them go through the story with those new meanings or new endings 3 or 4 times, and you know it's reconsolidated when they can tell the whole story through without all those negative meanings, and that they can get through it without feeling upset or dissociating. So in the next video, I'm going to actually share a client video so that you can see it demonstrated. I think that will help you get an even greater sense of what we mean by the recon process and how we use hypnosis to do it. So I'm going to share a demonstration. I'll share some additional ideas for how you might create a resource experience, how you could integrate this with other therapy methods. So even if you do EMDR, somatic experiencing, or internal family systems, You can still integrate hypnosis to make those methods even more powerful. And I'll tell you more about our upcoming live workshops, because I know a lot of you are going to have questions and are going to master these skills. So thank you for being here today. I'll hopefully get the next video out to you within the next couple days, and you can see the demonstration video for yourself. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can visit me at courtneyarmstrong.net or leave a comment in the box below, and hopefully I can get back to you in the next few days.